So these days, we're all familiar with annual releases and why they can be bad. Oversaturation, limited time to innovate, the commodification of art. There's a lot of issues. But what about the opposite? What about series that get so few games that they rely on the same title for an entire console generation or more? And I'm not talking about MMOs that can add new content to a single game for decades, or about series that die or go on hiatus. These are games that are relevant and popular, usually the biggest games in their franchises, but they've gone for way longer than you would expect without a sequel. So, maybe the best way to explain this is with some examples. There are 3 games I'd like to talk about, since they're easily the most prominent instances of this phenomenon. Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, Grand Theft Auto V, and Mario Kart 8 are the examples here. Mario Kart 8 is the most recent of these 3 games, and it came out in May of 2014, around 9.5 years ago. But these series all used to see regular releases. Heck, none of these games were even the first installment in their series in the generation they released. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion and Grand Theft Auto 4 both released on the PS3 and 360, the same consoles that Skyrim and GTA 5 originally released on. And while Mario Kart is typically a one game per console franchise, we did have Mario Kart 7 on the 3DS, the handheld system for the same era as the Wii U that 8 originally released on, and Mario Kart 7 came out only 3 years before Mario Kart 8. So we have 3 of the best-selling games ever made, going for a decade without sequels. Why does something like this happen? Well, I do think there are reasons on both the player and developer's side that something like this happens. For players, most of the reasons all boil down to the fact that these games, for varying reasons, are able to be played continuously over the course of the decade they've been around. Skyrim has, of course, its vibrant modding community providing essentially infinite content. And that's on top of it already being a game with a rather huge amount of stuff to do. And then Mario Kart 8 and GTA 5 both have multiplayer. They're not MMOs, though GTA Online does sort of try to be with its frequent updates, but I don't consider that disqualifying because the online mode isn't, or at least didn't used to be, the main draw of GTA. Okay, yeah, it kind of is now, but this is only really set in with GTA 5. Heck, Mario Kart 8's Switch version is given a boost by 2 years of DLC support that started 8 years after the original release of the game for Wii U and is set to conclude later this year, nearly 10 years after the original release. I can only assume this was a choice because they would rather make the next big Mario Kart title for the Switch's successor. Or maybe they thought they were releasing enough titles with online play in 2022? I don't know. Heck, maybe they just figured they would make more money off of a DLC for a little under $30 than they would selling a brand new game for $60, given that Mario Kart 8 has such a massive install base. But in any case, these games all have something that extends their lifespan. These are games that can be played for years, so going a long time between sequels does fit these series better than most, even if it is still a rather dramatic change from how things used to be. Meanwhile, on the developer side, it ultimately comes down to the fact that they just didn't need to release new games in the series to keep making money. GTA 5 has microtransactions that have probably made a depressing amount of money for the game. And somewhat more mundanely, Skyrim and Mario Kart 8 both had DLC. And then of course there are also re-releases. While we've all joked about Skyrim's endless re-releases, at least some of this was justified on consoles for all of these games. After all, the consoles following these games' releases all lacked backwards compatibility. So if you want to play Skyrim again but it boxed up your PS3, well, Bethesda selling you a new version for PS4 is really the only way you could play it. On top of that, we just have the changing game development scene. Games take more time and money to develop. And this is especially true for titles like GTA or Elder Scrolls, which are huge games that do take a while to develop. And of course, all these additional ways that these games can make money aside, why make a new game when the old game is still selling? Sales of a game are likely to fall off once a sequel is released, after all. So the longer they can keep making a profit off of one game, the better. Which of course leads to my next point, which is that for both players and developers, there's the fact that it isn't as though there have been nothing at all like these titles. Bethesda has released Fallout 4 and Starfield, Rockstar has released Red Dead Redemption 2, and Nintendo, well, while they haven't released anything directly similar, unless like you count Splatoon or Smash Bros for also being multiplayer centric. But it's Nintendo. They've released a lot of stuff, and fans of one Nintendo thing tend to be fans of a lot of Nintendo things. My point is that fans of these games aren't left entirely wanting just because the particular franchise has been on a break. And in fact, I do think that this variety is a good thing for everyone. Players get more varied experiences, which are also good for the industry and art form, and the developers get to put multiple games on the market that have a fair bit of appeal to the same players while avoiding directly competing with themselves. In spite of all that, though, it doesn't change that these specific series have been largely absent for a long time. Yes, I think it's better that we got Fallout 4 and Starfield to mix things up instead of just Elder Scrolls 6 and 7, but this is really more about the effects on the franchise itself, not on some broader nebulous concept of a game developer's house style. And speaking of effects, what are they? Well, these games may be the biggest entries in their respective franchises, but I feel like they've lost a bit for their franchises in the process. Sure, these games have sold a ton. These games are very popular, and I'm sure the devoted fans don't mind. But at the same time, the franchises have faded somewhat. When's the last time you felt really excited about any of these series, or heard much conversation about them outside of the die-hard fan communities? I mean, maybe you're a hardcore fan and are still totally into these games, and look, that's fine. I'm not judging you for that. But I imagine for a lot of more casual fans, it has been quite some time. Long enough that some people might have lost interest. I mean, maybe I'm wrong and absence will make the heart grow fonder, but to me at least, these franchises just aren't as relevant as they used to be. And I mean, 10 years is a long time. Think about what games you were into 10 years ago, if you can even remember. Chances are there's a lot of things you were into that you just aren't anymore. And there's probably several favorite series of yours that you hadn't even played back then. I know these are both true for me. Furthermore, there's the question of whether even the existing hardcore fans of these games will want to move over to the newer titles. Some Skyrim fans may not care to play a new Elder Scrolls game until it gets a good amount of support from modders, and GTA Online players may be reluctant to give up their in-game wealth, especially if it was bought with real-world wealth. Mario Kart 8, though, is in less danger of this, unless the new title comes too soon after the expansion pass, but even then I feel like inertia might be hard to break. Unless the game sells a ton of copies right at launch, then people might just say, well, why should I get that game when all my friends are still playing 8? Not to mention, going so long between titles means that the next titles in these series will almost have to be viewed solely as the new game in the series. What I mean is that it'll be harder for them to be experimental or include more one-off features. But at the same time, they will also have to do a lot to stand out compared to the games people have been playing for so long. It honestly feels like any new game in these series will be walking a tightrope. While oversaturation can certainly be a problem, being able to iterate every few years can give a title more room to breathe and keep games from having to be everything to everyone playing them. Ultimately, I don't know what the solution is here, or even if this is a problem. I certainly don't think these series should go to being yearly titles, since, as I said at the start, that has its own problems. But in some ways, I think that these games that have coasted on the same installment for decades have suffered many similar effects as I've outlined. I suppose we'll just have to see when we finally get a new title in one of these franchises, won't we? Honestly, again, I'm not even sure this is a problem. It's just something I've noticed and felt like making a video on. But what do you think? Have you felt your interest in these series wane? When the next titles come out, will you be right there at day one, or will you just not care? Were you a fan of any of these series back in their heydays when they released more regularly? And if so, do you think these more frequent releases were better? Are there any other series like these that you think have been coasting on their latest entry for a decade or more? Do you think this is all nothing and that stuff like GTA Online's updates, Elder Scrolls Online, and Mario Kart Tour on mobile are sufficient substitutes for new mainline games in these series? Am I providing too many questions as discussion prompts? Let me know in the comments below. This is MacLeod, signing off.